I'm talking about imposter syndrome, which is when you experience fraudulent thoughts and feelings and can't attribute and internalise your personal achievement to yourself. Which in other words is when you go, oh no, I have no idea what I'm doing and everyone's going to find out. And we're going to start with a bunch of questions to help you figure out if you have it. So these are based off the standard diagnosis questionnaire, which is generally a 5-point scale. But if you've experienced most of these, then you probably have it. So you can just put up your hand if you're experiencing them. And then we'll go to how does it work, some of the consequences, and some techniques for dealing with it. So some of the signs are if you've ever felt that you have succeeded on a test or task even though you were afraid that you would not do well before you undertook it. Lots of hands. You can give the impression that you're more competent than you really are. This one's really common, and once I'm able to do something, it seems obvious and easy, so it's not that hard. It doesn't make me that competent, right? But then what other people can do seems so much harder. I avoid evaluations if possible and have a dread of others evaluating me. When people praise me for something I've accomplished, I'm afraid that I won't be able to live up to their expectations in the future. Sometimes I think I obtained my present position or gained my present success because I happened to be in the right place at the right time or I knew the right people. I ended up with that quite a bit for my current job because I met the CIO at a conference and he referred me and I went, oh, did that have more to do with it than maybe it should have? And other people, quite a few other people I know that have been referred because they met someone who had confidence in them do tend to feel that way about their jobs. I'm afraid that people important to me may find out that I'm not as capable as they think I am. I tend to remember the incidents in which I have not done my best more than those times I have done my best. I rarely do a project or task as well as I'd like to do it. Sometimes I feel or believe that my success in life or in my job has been the result of some kind of error. It's hard for me to accept compliments or praise about my intelligence or accomplishments. At times, I feel my success has been due to some kind of luck. I'm disappointed at times with my present accomplishments and think I should have accomplished much more. Sometimes I'm afraid others will discover how much knowledge or ability I really lack. I'm often afraid that I may fail at a new assignment or undertaking, even though I generally do well at what I attempt. When I've succeeded at something or received recognition, I have doubts that I can keep repeating that success. If I receive a great deal of praise and recognition for something I've accomplished, I tend to discount the importance of what I've done. I often compare my ability to those around me and think they may be more intelligent than I am. I often worry about not succeeding with a project or examination, even though others have considerable confidence that I'll do well. If I'm going to receive a promotion or gain recognition of some kind, I hesitate to tell others until it's an accomplished fact. I feel bad and discouraged if I'm not the best or at least very special in situations that involve achievement. So most of us, it looked like there were a lot of hands going up. I think at least most people had their hands up for some of them, and some of them had a lot of hands up. And this phenomenon was initially discovered in high-achieving women in academia, but it's since been found in other populations, and everybody can have it. You don't have to fall into any of the particular groups that it's mainly been studied in. And it may be more common in women, but there's evidence going both ways, so I'm not sure what to make of that. And it may be higher in some ethnic groups, but that's really only been studied in African Americans, and that's area for further research. It's more common among minorities in their field, so in this case, women would be more likely to have it. People going after a new endeavour are also more likely to experience it. So I personally have a lot less of it in a tech context than I used to, but then when I started volunteering with the Greens and doing campaigning there and doing organising quite quickly, I felt it all come flooding back, and the same things as I had 3 years ago were coming back because it was a new situation. And what are some of the characteristics of this phenomenon? So it gets stuck in this cycle up here. Are you able to read that up the back? Cool, I'm getting some nods, that's good. So the cycle starts when we get achievement-related tasks. And then we tend to feel anxiety, self-doubt and worry in relation to those tasks, and there are two main ways of dealing with it. And different people will use different ways. People may switch between them depending on the circumstance or with time. I tend to go for the over-preparation one, where I work so hard on something, it's got to be perfect, put in lots of effort, and then I'll get the accomplishment, get a feeling of relief temporarily, get positive feedback on it, but then I discount the positive feedback because it only happened because I put in so much more work. The other path is through procrastination. So this would be if you put your assignment off to the last minute and then make a heroic effort on the last night. And then you get your accomplishment, feel relief, get the positive feedback, and then you discount it because you think you just got lucky. And you do this every single time, which probably makes it clear that it's not luck, but it's not very logical. And then discounting the positive feedback leads to perceived fraudulence, increased self-doubt, and higher risks of depression and anxiety. And then it just keeps going around when you get more achievement-related tasks. And it keeps reinforcing itself. And we end up attributing our successes to outside factors, anything other than ourselves. Luck, people we were working with. And then we attribute the failures consistently to ourselves and fail to take into account any other circumstances that could have contributed to it. And in the case of women, this can be consistent with societal views of us being less competent, so we can maintain the internalised version of the views we've been taught to have that work against us while still achieving. And we also tend to believe, people with imposter syndrome tend to believe that intelligence is fixed rather than malleable, and that learning and skilling up has less of an impact than it does. We tend to be motivated by performance-related goals and proving our intelligence, and we tend to react quite badly to failure. We can react quite helplessly, we can blame ourselves, withdraw from the task, withdraw from people, withdraw from the teams, and we tend to be overly concerned with other people's impressions of us and try and project a really heavily idealised self-image that is thoroughly unrealistic. And we tend to be far too dependent on the other people's impressions of us. And no matter how much success we get, it doesn't go away because we have this faulty attribution. We're never going to accept that we had any role in that success, so it's never going to make us feel any better. And it actually can when we have these perfectionist expectations, it can just emphasise the difference between what we did and what we expected of ourselves, which just makes it even worse. And we tend to have a desire to be the best and struggle to accept when we're doing well, but we aren't the best in anything involving achievement. And a lot of people will conclude that they must be stupid if they're not the best. Say they've been the big fish in the small pond in school, and then they've moved on to uni, and there are other people that are very capable, and because they're not the best, they think they must be stupid. And as Jacinta mentioned on Monday, when we're comparing ourselves to others, we pick their highlight reel. We don't pick their day-to-day behind the scenes, we just pick what they are projecting externally. And we also tend to compare ourselves to people that have accomplished a lot. I tend to also compare myself to people that are older than me, so have more accomplishments with more time. And we also often feel a bit of fear and guilt around success, which contributes to it not being satisfying for us. And it's also common for us to mistrust other people. And low enjoyable involvement with other people in women. Low play in everybody, so we don't do much for fun or really get a release. Low impulsivity in women, but actually high in men. Low need for change in women, but again, high in men. And men have a low need for order if they have imposter syndrome. And this stuff can really stem from in childhood. There are two main cases that can lead to it. So in the first case, someone has a sibling or a close relative that's a designated smart one, and they're told that they're not going to achieve much, they're not the smart one, maybe they're the people that are, maybe they're the one that's good at communication. So people will internalise that we're not meant to achieve these things, and then when we do, we have trouble accepting it because that's not what we were told we weren't meant to be able to. In another case, we can be told that we're superior in every way and success should come easily. And then when we realise that we've got to work for it, that it doesn't come easily and that there will be failures, we struggle to cope with that and make far harsher conclusions about our abilities than we should from failures rather than just learning from them. Another factor can be discrepancy between feedback and actual success. So if a kid is told, no matter what they do, that everything is, even if they fail, that everything is so wonderful and they're succeeding at everything, they learn that that feedback doesn't actually mean anything and that they shouldn't be paying attention to it, so then they fail to internalise any actual valid feedback. Or if they don't get any positive feedback when they should, then they end up feeling that nothing they ever do can be good enough, and they don't internalise it because no one around them is accepting or internalising it. And they can feel that their achievements are dismissed and that they're not impressive. And we're also more likely to have a high need to please others in our family and project a heavily idealised image to our family. It's also more common among people with neuroticism and achievement orientation and also perfectionism. And some work circumstances can contribute. Unfortunately, it hasn't been studied in technology, but anecdotally, it seems to be very, very common in technology. So it's generally higher in highly competitive and stressful occupations. So it's been studied in academia, and maybe one of the reasons it's higher in academia is the high peer review, which is also a factor for developers. And it was found to be higher in untenured faculty, so people that weren't permanent staff and didn't have that validation and that security. And it's also been studied in librarians, where it was found to be higher among systems librarians, which have high technical knowledge requirements, and they also have to deal with more change in their role, so it can quickly feel outdated, which sounds a lot like the constant change in technology and the expectation to learn about all these technologies and techniques that are emerging. And it's very easy to focus on the ones that people you know have some knowledge of, but you don't, and not consider what you yourself have done. And this is an area, racial issues are definitely an area for further research, but it's been looked at in African American women, and we may be able to draw some things for other groups from those studies as well. So they, as well as the issues that all women have to deal with, they have to deal with presumed incompetence of African American women. So they get told that they're incompetent, and it's hard for them to reject that and not internalise any of it. And because people are going to evaluate them unfairly negatively, they need to internalise their self-worth and make good assessments of their own abilities, because other people aren't going to do that. And something that was found to be particularly effective for them was group counselling sessions with other African American women, so other people in similar circumstances. They could really share their experiences and relate to each other better, and they could share techniques for dealing with it coming from people in similar circumstances, so they were more likely to be useful. And there are some theories that it's more of a self-presentation strategy than failing to internalise our accomplishments. We kind of don't want to appear imperfect, and we really try to present this perfect image, but then we can openly disclose our imperfections through things like rejecting positive feedback. And it could be a technique to avoid the negative interpersonal consequences of success, so maybe setting lower expectations so we have less consequences for future failures. And it is correlated with other favourable impression management techniques. And this would make a lot of sense for women in technology to do, since competence and likability are so heavily opposed for us. And there are a bunch of behaviours that we engage in that preserve it. We can engage in intellectual inauthenticity, where, say, we tell people what they want to hear rather than what we actually think. We could write something according to our teachers' biases if we're studying. We could implement something how our colleagues would want us to rather than what we think is optimal, and remain silent in the face of opposing viewpoints. But this means that we don't find out what people would think of our actual views and the approach we'd actually want to take, which stops us from getting that feedback that would help us break out of the imposter syndrome. We can also use charm to try to be liked as well as recognised intellectually. So it's common to pick a candidate to be a mentor, and then as well as trying to impress them intellectually, trying to charm them, maybe picking up their hobbies so you've got more to talk about or something, and work out how they'd like you to behave. And then generally we'll gain the approval, but since we've used the charm, tend to dismiss it. Oh, it's just because they like me. They're telling me that I'm so smart just because they like me. And then move on to another candidate, which we'll just keep dismissing as because they like us. So we never get that validation, can never internalise that validation that we're after. It's also common to avoid displays of confidence for fear of rejection. And among women, this can be used to comply more with societal expectations of our behaviour and competence. And what are some of the consequences of this? So it can lead to poor mental health. So if you're wondering about that, you should go and watch Ducky's talk about the importance of it. It leads to a higher chance of bouts of depression and anxiety. It can lead to emotional exhaustion and burnout and fatigue, general psychological distress, lower self-confidence, and lower job well-being, satisfaction, and performance. Some people say that their imposter syndrome pushes them to work harder and to strive for higher performance, but that's really not what the evidence says. Lower self-efficacy. But there are also some ways for us to cope. So mentoring is really helpful, even if you don't explicitly talk about imposter syndrome, but it's ideal to talk about it. You can get some emotional support from them. You can get some more tangible support with specific issues. And they can also challenge us to accept praise from them, which can help us to internalise it rather than just rejecting it. But mentors can also be a target of the unfair comparison that we discussed before. Oops. Positive reinforcement can also be really helpful, keeping on telling others and encouraging others to tell you the positive feedback to help you internalise it and challenging you to accept it. And something that I found really helpful for doing that was at the end of a Greens campaign I worked on. For the core team, they put together these envelopes of thank you notes for everyone to write that went to debriefs and was around the office. So I got all these notes that said much the same thing from different people about my contributions, ranging from coordinating door knocks to Friday lunchtime office quiz contributions. And seeing all these different people saying much the same thing all together really helped me internalise what they were saying much better than I would have if it had been done all separately. Because I could see that lots of people thought pretty much the same thing, so maybe there was something to it. And identifying the feelings is important because how are we going to address it if we can't identify it? And also helping others identify those feelings. Giving yourself a reality check and getting it from other people, comparing how you're feeling to the actual reality, and differentiating between those feelings and what's actually happening. Some people like to use humour to help deal with it. Some people like to just distract themselves with other thoughts and activities and try and push it out of their mind. You can get social support by talking about it to people. That could be helpful, much like the group counselling sessions were, preferably with people in a similar situation, so you can relate to each other better, feel more comfortable with it, and share tips that are more applicable to you. Try and reduce your dependency on external validation. That is one of the characteristics, and more internalise your self-worth. But what can we do straight after this talk? So I'd suggest talking about it among your peers. People have to be aware of it if you want to address it, and it could also be helpful like the group counselling sessions were. Be aware when you and others are showing it so you can fight it. When you're giving someone positive feedback and they're not accepting it, challenge them to accept it, try and be more precise. Be careful to attribute it to them and make it harder for them to attribute it to the external sources such as luck. And get perspective from other people when you're experiencing these feelings. Generally, other people are more able to assess your achievements than you are if you're experiencing imposter syndrome. But it's important to pick someone that will be fair on you, otherwise it's just going to make the whole thing worse. And thanks for paying attention give yourself a pat on the ear for paying attention in the last talk in the conference. And remember that you're awesome. That was meant to get more groans than laughs, but okay. And are there any questions? Yep. Yep, if you follow the link here to the GitHub repository, it's in there. And if you have trouble understanding the format, you can email me and I can find you the citation you're after. Yep. There's a book called... So I went for the papers because I was looking for more detail, but there's a book by Pauline Rose Clance, who was one of the people that initially discovered it and has done a lot of the research I was referring to. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but if you look up Pauline Rose Clance, you'll be able to find it. Any others?